listening to Sable Radio.
Hi, I'm Ruby Fatimilehin, and today I'm going to be talking with the poet Khadijah Ibrahiim about her poetry, her creative writing, and her work with the Inscribe Readers and Writers group. I was wondering if first you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your writing and about your first collection of poetry, Another Crossing.
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Ruby, for inviting me to be a guest and to talk about poetry and literature in the city. So my name is Khadijah Ibrahiim. I'm a poet and literary activist, but also I make theatre and I write for performance. I'm also the artistic director for Leeds Young Authors, which is a writing collective that supports young writers in the city of Leeds.
Mm-hmm. That sounds lovely. With your first collection of poetry, Another Crossing, I know you're the co-director currently of Inscribe Readers and Writers Group, which is part of Peepal Tree Press. I was wondering how Inscribe kind of nurtured your talent and helped you write Another Crossing.
Yeah, sure. I should have actually added that to my list of credentials, but sometimes you feel like you're going on a little bit too long when you say, and I'm this and I'm that.
Yeah. I want to hear all about it.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm an interdisciplinary artist, so I wear many hats in regards to writing and literature. So Peepal Tree Press set up a writing group to nurture writing initially in the north of England, and then that went national. And that was set up by Peepal Tree Press and coordinated by Dorothea Smart and Khadijah George. So under that label, roundabout, I may have my dates a little bit mixed here, but I think it was round about maybe 2004, 2005 that happened. And so they were really looking for writers in the north, well, actually first in Yorkshire, that had a passion for writing, and they just needed that mentorship and that support to be able to take their work to the next level.
Yeah.
I was already writing, I was already performing, but I didn't have anything published per se, and I knew that was going to be the next step for me. So I was selected under that programme of Inscribe, Peepal Tree Press. And so throughout that programme, they set up a range of writing workshops, of mentorship, but also ways in which we could explore not just writing, but craft and literature across the board. So really have this appreciation of the way people were responding to the world in different ways. Now, Peepal Tree Press are the biggest publishers of Caribbean literature globally. But they also publish Black British writers as well. So I come into that category of Black British writers. And I was very much aware of Peepal Tree Press from some years before that. And I just thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to have your work published? Yeah. And so I was very fortunate because I was out there performing that they were aware of me. So when the programme came up, I was one of those fortunate writers to be selected. And so the process was about attending writing workshops, it was about having discussions, it was going to conferences, but it was really examining literature across the board, that it could inspire our writing. So part of that programme, I was very fortunate to be able to put together a collection of poems. So actually before Another Crossing, I had a shorter collection, what we call a chapbook collection, which is an introduction to your work called Roots Running. And that was published in, I think it was 2007 that was published. And part of that programme was also about responding to the abolition of the slave trade, the commemoration that was happening across Britain. And so the chapbook wasn't really an automatic response, but it responded in some shape or form because of my African Caribbean background and someone that's born in Britain. So that was the first short collection, and that collection was successful in the sense that I was then part of a touring company called F Words, and we toured part of the UK, and then we went to the United States, and we travelled to Washington and Philadelphia and New York, a whole range of different places. Howard University, really sharing our work. Washington University, it was really amazing. And so then out of that short collection of Roots Running came Another Crossing, which is then the full official published collection, and that was 2014.
That's so beautiful to hear about how this smaller collection kind of blossomed into this, the bigger piece, Another Crossing. Would you be able to read Roots Running for us, actually? Because I know it's in this one, and I really love that poem. I think what I really love about your poetry is the way that it's so musical and the way that it encompasses such a wide, broad range of different genres. I currently, I just finished writing my dissertation. I wrote a chapter about some of your poems from Another Crossing, and I was writing about Rock Against Racism, so I wrote about Rock Against Racism, which obviously touches on punk, and then there's also two-tone as well in that, which I think is amazing. And then I know you also have poems that talk about dance hall and jazz funk and everything.
That's right,
So I just love how you kind of blend music into your poetry. So if you'd be able to read Roots Running for us, that would be really wonderful.
Yeah, sure. And, I was going to say, when I'm writing, I'm so glad that you played the first track, because that is by Fertile Ground. It's Black Is. And it's a track that I started playing last year. To really uplift me through the pandemic. It was a track that I was listening to in my little speaker box on my bike, in my basket, and just to really give me that sense of encouragement, but also it inspires my writing. So I'm going to read Roots Running, which is the title of the first short collection. Up there in a Lawrence tavern, right up there where the sugar cane grows, there, my great-granddaddy's sweat could have watered the soil. Imagine him, steadfast, bent and buckled, with a machete sharp and swift, him cut and release the sugary liquid that make the rum that we now offer in remembrance of the McLaren name in the family line. But I ask myself, who is McLaren? Could he be the one that did own all these acres before we did know, say we they free to drink this rum as sweet as blood and sunshine as we pour it to the soil and remember who we they call on to know we not stronger than we roots.
Oh, that's so beautiful. See, this is what I'm saying. I love the way that the musical essence is in your poetry, and you can really hear it, and it's just wonderful to hear you read it out. What I also love so much about Another Crossing is the way that it's so located in certain spaces. I especially love kind of the earlier poems that are set in Chapeltown and kind of the Leeds locality. I think how has being part of, obviously I know you said that Inscribe is now kind of national, but how has being part of this writing group in Leeds and in Yorkshire kind of added and shaped your craft?
Well, I would say it has shaped my craft tremendously, because it's made me think about what I'm writing about. I've always been an observer of life, and I love the way conversations take shape. I love listening to conversations. Now, some people might describe that as being nosy. Then I would say, well, then I'm nosy, because I will listen to a conversation. I listen to the rhythm of speech and the way in which people are describing things. And so what Inscribe gave to me was the ability to actually rewrite some of those stories and put them on the page, so that I could share them with a wider community, not just the community that I grew up in, which is Chapeltown and Hare Hills, but an international community. So the poems sit on an international platform. And so that's what Inscribe gave to me, but it also gave to me a sense of belief in self that this was possible. Because growing up in Leeds in the 70s, as a young black girl, where racism was so rife, in the city of Leeds, not just Leeds, but across the United Kingdom, but not spoken about.
Yeah.
really just discarded, like it didn't exist. But the sufferation of those children that had parents that were part of that Windrush generation was real, and I was part of that. And it was very difficult to be able to express that, to talk about that. So you went to school and you never talked about any of those experiences. So what Inscribe helped me to do was really go back into my memory and pull out those poems and really put them into rhythm and sound and words that I could then use them as performance to open up a bigger discussion around community, diversity, race, racism. So you talk about Rock Against Racism as one of the poems that you read. I remember that so well.
Yeah.
You know, where I lived, there was so much happening across Britain, that the riots had already happened. And, you know, I was a child at middle school at the time, and the riots had taken place. And I had no idea what this rioting was really all about, apart from the conversations that were taking place amongst the adults. And that was around race and unfair treatment and the sus laws. And then there was this march happening, which I had no idea. It just marched past my street. And I was like, wow, look at these people. I wouldn't have called it protesting. It was just a carnival of people chanting. And I just joined it and headed to Potter Newton Park. And there, you know, I had no idea about the political backdrop of what Rock Against Racism was at that time. I was more excited at the fact that there were all these people chanting, and there I was in Potter Newton Park, and there they were, this band that I'd seen on TV that I'd loved so much, which was the Specials, you know, and that's all I was like, the Specials, you know. And it wasn't until I was older and I went back into that idea of stories and storytelling that I realised the political landscape, what was happening then, what the backdrop and what the importance of what Rock Against Racism was, why there was writing, why there was this separation of culture. And my grandparents now, which I realised were political activists, and that these meetings in the home that were taking place was meetings around change. And this was the meeting place where they were gathering to protest, you know, to get ready to protest. They were making placards. But as a child, it's just something happening in the home. So really, Another Crossing is about really retelling those stories in a way that I could remember them, but also researching them to make sure that I had the facts correctly.
Yeah.
So remembering dates was difficult for me as a child. So I had to go back and think, when was Rock Against Racism? Let me find out when that actually took place, and then what was my age and what was taking place, and when was the start of Rock Against Racism before it even came to the city of Leeds, so knowing it started in London and things like that. So that's what really Inscribe gave to me, that ability to really go back into my memory bank and write stories.
Yeah, and I think that's so evident in Another Crossing, and just beautiful the way that you kind of have these two voices. There's the younger you, the child you, and then the older you, kind of looking back and observing and kind of picking these things out that you wouldn't necessarily have realised at the time. I think it's just beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I think that's important, because what we often do as children and as we're growing up, we tend to remember, we have selective memory. So we remember certain things, and we remember things that either gave us something that gave us joy or something that was traumatic. I wanted to explore joy and trauma, but the in-between, that liminal space of in-betweenness, of otherness, and also thinking of myself as an African Caribbean girl growing up in this British landscape, and what was that, and really beginning to understand that concept of doubleness, and living that life where you're in this Caribbean household, and everything's very, my parents are Jamaican, everything's very Jamaican, the food's Jamaican, the reggae music, the laughter, the language, and then you leave out of that home and you go into the streets and play with your friends that are coming from all these different cultural backgrounds, and you go into school and you're in this school that's predominantly white, and you can't take that language of patois and that food of the Caribbean into school. It's something for home, and you're in this school and you're eating food, English food, that some of it you've never even been exposed to until you've gone to school. So one of my earliest memories was going to primary school and being fed what I called flowers. It was cauliflower. I'd never seen this vegetable in my life. You know, it was cauliflower, there was sprouts, what I said, they looked like baby cabbage. I was trying to describe this tasteless food to my mother and being forced to eat it.
Yeah.
And where was the seasonings? You know, where was the curry goat and rice? Where was the rice and peas? You know, where was all this Caribbean food? It was not in school. So that's the doubleness. So being able to understand what that means to you as an individual, and then how to put that into words.
Yeah, and I think that's so beautiful, and it comes across so well in Rock Against Racism, kind of your engagement with these different subcultures, because there's the punk, and then there's the two-tone, and there's your own experience kind of growing up in Hare Hills and Chapeltown. And I just really love it. Would you want to read it for us potentially?
So which
or maybe
Rock Against
we should have
Racism?
a song break and then do that after.
Let's have a song break. That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Render your art and not your garments. The truth is there for who have eyes to see. Partiality has no place in this judgment. Remember the words of prophecy. Children run, come to truths and rights. That's what I'm about. You know the truths and rights. Teach it to the children. You know the truths and rights. Teach it to the children, 'cause they should know. No, 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 no. Children, say a little prayer every night before you go to sleep. 'Cause tomorrow is promised to no one. When you think it's peace and safety, Lord, it could be sudden destruction. 'Cause we know, yes we know. Words to you. Remember the word I am saying to you right now. And for tomorrow and henceforth I say, render your hearts and not your garments. The truth is there for who have eyes to see. Partiality has no place in this judgment. Just remember the words of prophecy. I say, children run, come to truths and rights. That's what I'm about. You know the truths and rights. Teach it to the children. Run, come to truths and rights. That's what I'm about.
I love that song, Ruby, by the way. So that's Johnny Osborne, Truth and Rights. And you asked me to read Rock Against Racism. And that song, for me, just the lyrical content, you know, render your hearts and not your garments, you know, and run to truth and rights. And so I feel that what Rock Against Racism was doing was saying, let's remove this hate that we have against diverse communities. And let music be the food of love to bring us together. Because that's what Rock Against Racism was. And so it incorporated reggae music, punk, you know, rock music, all kinds of music. And so when I listen to that song, it really takes me back to that time, you know, and it really speaks to me in lyrical and musical content to think about what was happening during that time as, as a child. So I'm going to read Rock Against Racism for you.
Thank you.
Rock Against Racism. In our back-to-back and through terrace houses, working class black and white youth played snap. Sex Pistols latched onto the white heat, graffitied Elizabeth's head, stuck 2 fingers up, wore safety pins and spat on the Union Jack. We watched them pogo dancing up and down to the Clash white riots of reggae snatched rhythms, while Maggie snatched milk, brought recession and the poll tax. And when the specials rocked against racism, they marched right past my street, up to Potter Newton Park, till it was like a zebra crossing, black and white, as far as you can see.
Oh, thank you for reading that. That was beautiful. Yeah, I really, really love this poem. And you're right, I think the final image at the end of a zebra crossing is so powerful, of these kind of bringing different groups together through music and through kind of creative practice. Talking about the Inscribe Writers Group, how do you think that obviously poetry and writing can often be quite a solitary experience and it can be quite personal? How do you think interacting with these other people and kind of, engaging with them and telling them about what you're writing and hearing about what they're writing, how do you think that has kind of helped you grow as a writer?
Yeah, well, I wanted to really share my experience of being part of Inscribe through Peepal Tree Press and just everything that I received, and still that I continue to receive as a writer. And Peepal Tree Press approached me and asked me to co-coordinate a group here in Leeds. And I was really pleased to do that because, number one, I know so many people. And what I wanted to do was to, get the obvious people that were writing. And it's called Readers and Writers, by the way. So people that were reading, people that were writing, people that had an opinion around literature and really needed that platform to express. And so I decided that I would kind of mix the group and give it some spice, if you like. So I invited people that I knew that were artists, that I knew they'd done really wonderful things with their lives. And everyone has a story. So when people say to me, how can I get into writing? I have a story. It's not that naturally that they're writers, but naturally they're storytellers. And everyone has a story to tell. The idea is about how do we tell that story to capture the attention of a reader. That's the important thing. So I invited a range of people that I knew that were dancers, academics, artists, people working in theatre, people that were already writing academic papers, people that were studying. But these were fascinating people that I knew that if they were given the opportunity and a space and a safe space to have this open dialogue around writing and literature. And remembering that Peepal Tree, they're better known for publishing Caribbean literature.
Yeah.
So what would it be for them to be exposed to more Caribbean literature? Because when you think about Britain and you're going into bookshops or you're going into the library, it's very rare and very difficult that you can find Caribbean literature. So part of that work is also about how do we decolonize the archives, how do we decolonize libraries and the educational system and really bring to the forefront those marginalized voices, but also those voices that make up Britain and have made up Britain for many, many years, whether it be through the Windrush generation or even pre-Windrush,
Yeah.
How do we really bring those voices to the forefront and really explore them? So that was the idea of the Readers Writers Group through in Peepal Tree Press. So I was really honoured to be the co-coordinator of that. So my job was really to bring people into a space, invite workshop leaders, invite published authors to come and share their skills, look at craft, look at poetry, look at novels, look at short stories, and the idea of how we begin to document those stories in our own words. How does our story on the page become relevant, and what makes it readable? So that's the idea of Inscribe. And so my conversation with Peepal Tree Press in the early part of that was, this is great, we've got so many people in this workshop and we've got access to so many workshop facilitators like Malika Booker and Jacob Ross, and we also had Caribbean writers that were on tour that were able to come into the space as well and share, and also writers from Manchester like Pete Kalu. So it was wonderful. Yvonne Weeks, from the Caribbean. But what was the end result of this? What was going to come out of these workshops? And I wanted something quite similar to my experience.
Yeah.
I got a collection, I got a chapbook, then I got a full collection. But before even having my chapbook and full collection, some of my poems were going into anthologies. And an anthology is a collection of other people's works and your work. So you really get a real feast of a variety of writers. So could it be an anthology? What would it be? And so we talked a little bit about that. And we had access to the wonderful novelist Jacob Ross.
Yeah.
And so the decision was made that Jacob Ross would come in and really lead a lot of these workshops, really give them the craft of writing. And I mean, he's a great novelist. He's also a poet, he's a fiction writer for crime. He's amazing, in terms of what he's been doing. One of his books, The Bone Reader, is really worth reading. Pine to Bender, A Way to Catch the Dust. There's so many books that he's an author of. And he's also known as the people's writers for really helping you to craft. And some of the people that he's mentored in the past have gone on to win literary prizes. So we were a winner having him in the space, most definitely. And Jacob came into the space and really helped us to shape what is now weighted words. And he really worked very closely with a lot of the writers, and I just want to kind of read off some of the names.
Yeah.
So someone like Jason Allen Pesant has contributed to this collection. Jason is an academic at the University of Leeds in the English department. And he's a professor, but also is a poet in his own right. And he has a new collection coming up called Thinking with Trees. So it's amazing that we was able to get some of Jason's work in here, Malika Booker, Forward Prize winner for the best single poem, So, and then having people like Emily Zobel Marshall, who's also an academic but a poet. So it's amazing to have all these people, and Kathy Williams, the artist director for RJC. So we associate her with dance, but she has a wonderful story about being a gymnast and going to the Olympics and being one of the youngest at the Olympics of that time, I think in the 70s or the 80s. So it's really amazing. Pauline Mayers, Melody Walker, David Hamilton, so many people in the collection and worth buying.
Yeah, definitely.
I hope I've plugged that book enough. It's weighted words.
No, it is.
Editor,
it's fantastic.
Yeah, Jacob Ross. So yeah, and Peepal Tree Press.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think really, truly, one of the strengths of the collection is the range of experiences, the range of stories, even just the age ranges of the people who have written it. I think the youngest person was 19 and the oldest was 86. So
yeah, that's right.
Different life stories and experiences all kind of coming together. I know you said you had quite a few different people come in and lead workshops. I was wondering if there was anyone in particular that you really enjoyed, or anyone that you can recall that you really felt you learnt something from?
I mean, I always learn something from Jacob Ross. He's just got this particular skill about the way in which he helps you to craft your words on the page. But we also had Romy Smith come into the workshop, and she's a great poet based in Leeds, Malika Booker. Yvonne Weeks. I can't even say who was my favourite because some people came in to teach fiction. Fiction's not my strength, although I do try to tackle it in prose or short stories and more poetry. So anyone coming in to teach poetry, I would say that's my favourite. That's my favourite. But we also had a poet from St. Lucia called Kendall. And he was amazing. His workshops were absolutely amazing. And so anything that anyone was doing, as for me, around poetry, was very inspiring for me to even develop and create even my own ideas. So those workshops were for the people that I brought into the space, but I also, as the co-coordinator, benefited so much from being in the sessions.
Yeah, that sounds really great. I was wondering if you'd be able to read a poem from the collection for us.
Sure.
Is there anyone in particular you would like to read? Or if not, I'd really love The Man Who Walks with Crosses and Feathers, because I feel like that one is just so beautiful and musical and really brings out like the best aspects of what I love about your poetry. So
sure, I mean, I'll read that one for you, no problem. This poem originally, just to add, even though it's in this collection, it was actually written for... back in 2017, 2018, and that was around the acknowledgement and the celebration, commemoration of the Windrush generation. And so I really wanted to create a story that talked of that time, but looking at what was happening here now. So this man is from that generation of Windrush, and he's actually someone that I don't personally know, but I'm an observer of him. And when I wrote this poem and somebody read it in the book, they says, I know who he is, he's my brother-in-law. Really? I got this message and they sent it round and I said, is that your brother-in-law? So they knew straight away who it was. So yeah, The Man Who Walks with Crosses and Feathers. I'm going to say, by the way, to maybe some of your listeners, that I do switch into patois sometimes. But I'll try and keep it as much as people...
No, I think it's great. It really adds to the musicality of the reading.
Them say, trouble take him. Can't see if him old shoes fit. Him walk with crosses hanging from his eyeglass. A dozen of more pan him neck. Bent up weight of a crucifixion was borrowed pain, and forgiveness was a pulsating rhythm in him left hand, upholding a staff like Moses. Him one, walking, eyes crisscrossing the skylines as if sea map back home, assailing cracks in the pavement. Notating verse in his island Bible, chipping morning colours. Carnival mass feathers fall from his dusty hat, the price of him limp, dead skin. Troubled hands, him pockets full of the saltiness of sweat of this place, he say. Kaizo man, singing holy with drum and treble pan, throwing message of bush bath, melting black liquid of jab molasses, hard time and fire and fear, styled rhythms. Donkey one water if you hold him Joe. Hold who? Him who fear God, who doppy frightened, who run left him pitney for next woman, who soon dead. His voice treads the softness of the steel breeze. His feet cowbell knocking notes in the coldness of these streets. The hotness of pan licking back home lyrics. The smoothness of hallelujah, praise be to God songs. Walking alone with prayers and mass feathers and a whole heap of crosses. And no one dare ask, how I take him? How I make him look so? The talk is, since his wife dead and cross over, him never too right. Him tie him belly to grief and prayer songs beneath the grey sky, in favor of all black birds. But he's still preaching, still walking, chipping and calypso wheeling crosses from his eyeglass, waiting for testimony, blood of Christ in verse for punishment, until nights become orange earth, like home, He bearing his crosses across his chest in pan and sang. He not kin teeth. Him not in at the bacchanal. Him say he waiting for carnival and Jesus.
Oh, I love that poem. I love how it ends as well. It's just beautiful. A lot of poems in this collection, I think, kind of touch upon crossing, as poems in your Another Crossing collection do.
Yeah.
But in terms of crossing over from life to death, quite a lot of them talk about like transitional periods such as those. I was wondering if there was anything that kind of inspired that, or anything that you were kind of engaging with at the time that kind of,
Yeah, I'm so pleased you picked that up. Because my more recent work has been looking at that transition, those transformation in which life and death meet at the crossroads. And we very rarely talk about death in a British society. It's very much frowned upon in the sense that nobody wants to talk about it because it's too sad and too emotional. But in the Caribbean community and also in the African community, and I know other communities as well, death is a conversation to be had. Whether you're preparing for death or whether somebody close to you has passed away. And the idea for these poems that I'm actually working on at the moment, my latest work, is about that liminal space in which we occupy life and death and conversations. And within the practice of the Jamaican culture of obia. Now, obia was a practice that was outlawed during slavery. And it's a ritual practice. The nearest I can say to you is voodoo in Haiti.
Yeah.
It's all the same, in which these practices about the living and the dead, the ancestors, and calling on ancestors to honor them, but also calling on ancestral worship to guide you. Yeah. So that guidance, that transition, that transformation, that manifestation of living and dead in conversation. And so a lot of my work is exploring those between spaces of how we have those conversations. So often when someone passes away, they don't just pass away and they're dead and that's it. Some people may say, well, I'm an atheist. They die and then that's the end of it. And that's fine if that's your school of thought. But there are many schools of thought that come from an ancient practice. And we can trace these ancient practices back to even the Egyptians, the Dogons. We can trace these practices in the Caribbean back to Africa, through the Congolese practice, through Ghana, through Nigeria, whether we're talking about the Orisha practice of sky spirits and gods and goddesses, how they occupy the living and the dead, but that transformation of soul and spirit. So I'm really exploring what that means, these dead rites and these rituals and honouring. And so a lot of my work recently has been looking at the practice of 9 nights. So 9 nights after the person dies, what is the conversation up until that point? The person dies, we're in mourning in the Caribbean. In mourning means to be also in conversation with the dead. Yeah. And so they welcome the dead back into their home. And they have conversations and they lay food and there's lots of rum and there's music and there's song and there's worship. And then on the 9th night, they say the spirit has to leave. You have to leave. And so that's the burial. So that's the practice of funerals and burial rites. They have to leave. And so there's this thing about, in the practice of obia, that if you do not give the dead their rights, they will return. Or if the person dies suspiciously and nobody investigates, the spirit is restless. And I guess in a European context, they may describe that as the poltergeist. We say the duppy. The duppy will return and cause havoc. But also the duppy can return to have conversation of place and meaning. And so what are these rituals of calling on spirits and ancestral worship? So that's really what I'm exploring a lot about that, but also the practice of burial, how we prepare the dead, how we are in those conversations of preparing the dead and what we bury them with, and so some of I have a piece in here in Weighted Words that kind of has that those conversations with the dead. Yeah.
Would you like to read that?
I would
you kind of led up to it so much. I feel like it's only natural now to hear it.
Well, yeah, you know.
Or maybe we should listen to a song first.
We could listen to a song. Yeah. No problem.
Even though the road is long, no matter what come, I know I'm gonna make it. Yes, I'm gonna make it. Even though the road is long, no matter what come, I know I'm gonna make it. Yes, I'm gonna make it.
Remember the days of toting water, anytime that you have to bid. Or when people pass and they see you, oh my Lord, used to feel that shame. Wondering if this lasts forever, wondering when you will feel proud. If it's one thing Daddy didn't tell me, there is sunrise after each cloud. I say, even though the road is long, no matter what come, I know I'm gonna make it. Oh Lord, I'm gonna make it. Even though the road is long, no matter what come, I know I'm gonna make it. Yes, I'm gonna make it.
Oh, I love that song. So that song is called The Journey, or The Journey in translation, Make It. And it's by a beautiful singer from Trinidad called Ella Andan and Devon Matthews. Devon Matthews died probably a couple of years ago. But I love that song because it talks about that even though the road is long, we know we're going to make it. So ring the bell. Well, actually she says ding the bell. And bells are so important, that sound of bells and gongs in spirituality to clear the space, to bring something new, a new energy into the space. And also that represents my love for soca music as well and carnival. So I think that brings us nicely into Red Panties. I'm not sure about your listeners.
Oh, I love this one.
But we know what panties are. And red panties in Jamaican, Caribbean culture is a symbol of protection. So when somebody dies, if it's your partner, they'll say, when you go to bed tonight, wear red panties. It stops the dead from coming back and doing things for you. Now, we have to think about the dead still having powers and that they can do things too. They can enter into you. So this poem actually comes out of a conversation when I was in Jamaica, and I heard this conversation and I recrafted it into a poem. So there's elements of truth in here with creativity. Red panties. One time them used to say, if your husband dies, you should wear red panties. Red panties is protection, like faith, book, and church hymnals. Stop the dead returning and lying down in your bed beside you. Red panty is protection, same as river baptism and beating tambourines. It tie you, stopping from sex you, from creep inside your body parts, ride your night and day in your sleep. How are you a steady girl? Yes, me dear Miss Ruby. You never hear about red panty protection? Stop the dead from show himself. You never hear when Matty fierce the husband come back and make holiday, show himself from the grave and sex her. And what kind of foolish talking girl? Yes, me dear, I believe it. And the whole of we see Matty swell belly hang down like cow, and the 2 foot them bend same as banana leaf just a swear in the bush. Imagine, she is 75 and she pregnant. No man coming and going from her yard since her husband dead and gone. Matty carry But she couldn't push out that the pumpkin head pitney, card tight neck like vine, make it barn dead. All because she never wear red panties. Too busy I sit down a market, I sell her overpriced rice and peas with red tie neck. A true, she food price was too expensive and dear. I go on like she dey at town when she dey a country. Me mother say, a greedy husband give her 12 pitney, and if she did wear red panties, when him dead, plant peas pan top of him grave, him would a stay put. How are you a said, girl? Miss Ruby, you better go find your red panties. Shut up your mouth, no girl. After me at 89, and no man or duppy a touch me. And furthermore, me have me cutlass ready for draw and chop off them seed if any come round ya. Jesus have mercy. We live another day to repent we sins.
Oh, I love that poem. I think it's great. And I think what you were talking before, saying before about being nosy and kind of listening to other people's conversations and hearing what they're saying and incorporating it into your writing, that really comes across here. And I think it's so well executed.
Oh, thank you. And it's a difficult one for some people if they don't understand the what we call the nation language of Jamaica, the patois of Jamaica. Even though I speak it and I write it sometimes, when I go to Jamaica, remember I'm born in Leeds, I'm a Yorkshire girl. So, when I'm ready, the Yorkshire accent comes out and I get to Jamaica and I think my patois was okay, but it's not. And I really hear this really beautiful rhythm of this nation language, of this patois. And so I try to write it and I really become part of imitating that patois. But I was described as the Yorkshire Jamaican. And I said, the Yorkshire Jamaican that speaks patois, I will own the label of Yorkshire Jamaican. So that's what when I'm reading, that's how my patois sounds. It's very Yorkshire, it's very Jamaican, but it's very grounded in that Caribbean folklore of traditions, of language and rhythm.
Yeah, it's just what you're saying about kind of liminal spaces, liminal interactions, kind of these in-between spaces that I think is just so prevalent in most of your work. I know you've got some poems that you're currently working on, and after you've been telling me about how your writing practice has been developing in terms of the subject area you're creating, I'd love to hear about it. So. Right,
well, we've been talking about music, and I really feel that when I'm writing, there is always some kind of rhythm and sound or music that has inspired me in some shape or form. One of the things that I loved, and I still love, but what I grew up with was reggae music. But the sound system culture. Yeah. People talk about sub-dub now. Oh, sub-dub. I'm like, sub-dub is all right, but not when I was growing up. This was really authentic, sound system culture, bass line. When was playing the earlier track by Johnny Osborne, Truth and Rights, I really wanted to hear the bass in it because that bass would have been turned up and the rhythm, the vibration would manifest in you and come out of you to make you dance in a particular way. A dance that is not rehearsed. It's very much... what's the word? It's very much, it's spontaneous and it just happens and it moves through the body with sound and rhythm and remembrance. And so I was commissioned recently by the Royal Literature Society to create a piece which is part of a program called, this piece is called Sound Vibration and the program is called Sonic Vibration. And it's looking at the whole culture of sound system, not just the rhythm of the music and the sound, but the integration of what that means within a British society, what was brought from the Caribbean, so the crafting of boxes. And I'd written sound system poems before, so I struggled with this one a little bit, and I wanted to look at the language of dub, that bass, and how bass... that power of bass that resonates through the body, through a sonic vibration, is also a manifestation of spirit and spirituality. and which makes the body react, but also it makes us think in a different way. It's almost like trance and transformation and manifestation of self. And it transports us back to this understanding of belonging, you know, and ancestral wisdom. So this piece tries to kind of capture some elements of that while thinking about that liminal space. Yeah. So it's called Sound Vibration. I haven't actually read this in public.
I'm honoured to
I
hear
haven't read
it.
it. I've recorded it, and Dub Mythology a group called Dub Mythology put music over it, but I've never actually read this live. So, Sound Vibration. This language of dub could be bodies mapping memory, tuned, retuned, transmission to a mystic sound vibration. Do you remember the days of slavery? Ancestral frequency, Wolof, Igbo, Akan, dip and fall back of Kumina, Groundation Zion, revival songs, swelling earth, dub, bias, sanctified callous hands, beating, bingy, drum, harticle vibrations to chant down Babylon's throne. Steppers over rockstone, cold ground blues, tough gong retention. Embodiment of dreams, trodding back to Africa. Levitate through craft stacked heavyweight speaker boxes, wiring the gut with purpose. To raise the dead, wake up the living. This reggae, this Irish sound waves of redemption. Say, I and I, there. Rewinding to come back again with melodic heartbeat and radical rhythms to denounce all rude boy. Digger burial ground for red yai, tin pan, drum pan, db hang pan nail, Lego beast, soul man, who come for test, this ya dub, BS, amplify, Jashaka, Wasifa, Maverick, deep dubshan waves, moving, cool and deadly, with top-notch rhythms, turntable precision, kind weighted needle on liquid vinyl, crisp and crackle of culture dub plates. What a live and bamba, yeah! When clash, cark, grin, screw fierce, the slow burn of boastfulness, man and man skanking up sweat and sweet, sensey and special brew heat, liberate, dub, bias, midnight skin, front man selector, track natty, chatting and the mix me down, chanting, wa-da-da, oh, wa-da-da, sound, vibration, tuned, retune this transmission.
That was beautiful. I love that.
Thank you.
Honestly, it's so lovely to hear your work read aloud. I think we're running out of time, but I guess my final question to you would be, what's coming next? What are you doing?
Yeah, well, what's coming next is the Dead and Wake that I've been working on. Recently worked with wonderful DJ and turntablist Nick Knack to create soundscapes with poetry. So I'm actually extending that work into... I talked about liminal spaces and installations. So to create an installation piece in which people can access a space in which they can go into that sense of remembrance and remembering someone that has passed away. We've been living through this pandemic now for over a year, and we've lost so many people. And so with this particular work, it's about how can we access a space to remember, but also to give thanks. And so this work that I'm doing, Dead and Wake, is really about exploring space, place, landscape, bodies in the landscape, but retelling those narratives that have a Caribbean feel, but also brings to the forefront this practice of obia, which was outlawed in the time of slavery and is still outlawed in Jamaica today. So really bringing it to the forefront through revivalism. So I'm still working on that. And so the next piece is working on this installation piece through a project called On Ending Life, which is with Theatre in the Mill, Bradford.
Yeah.
And so that's the next work that I'm kind of exploring. But I've got other work. I'm working with Phoenix Dance Company to write for them. I'm working with the Performance Ensemble on The Promise of a Garden. There's so many things, that I'm working on, and I feel blessed to be able to have the space and the time to write and really just share my writing and my research with a wider international audience.
That all sounds fascinating. I can't wait to hear it, see it, just engage with it in any way possible. It's been lovely speaking with you today.
Thank you, Ruby.
I think we'll play like a final song to take us
wonderful.
out. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Miss Ruby. Although you're not the Miss Ruby in the poem, but thank you